So we have the recall of the Board of Supervisors. We've got red, white, and blueprint. We've got other things going on in Shasta County that the citizens are rising up and doing to fight back. What would you say is unique about Shasta County and how they've responded to this overreach, and what could we do better as well?
Maximizing individual liberty. Defending inalienable rights. Protecting the Constitution. Welcome to the Liberty Enforcement Podcast.
I think that's a really good question. So I came to Shasta County because my ex-girlfriend grew up here. And so I was familiar with the county, and I've come here to camp, and outdoor recreation is one of my passions. So I've been here many, many times in the years past. But as when COVID hit, Shasta County responded very differently, which is people here believe in the Constitution. They believe in America. They are patriotic. And this is a red county. This is fundamentally a red county where the people care about their rights. And that's a very different reality than other places around the country. But what also makes Shasta County different is that the people here started actually showing up to the political process. They started holding the political officials responsible and accountable. And so we end up with a dynamic where you had the founder of Red, White, and Blueprint, Carlos Zapata, who went up in front of the Board of Supervisors, and he's a former military vet, and he's a business owner. He just flat out, to paraphrase him, he's basically said, look, you got to start respecting people's basic liberties and doing your job in respecting people's liberties, or they're going to rise up and you're going to have war here. Now, and that is now different than JFK's famous quote. You know, the reality is that the people here have a different understanding of liberty and their place not as pawns of government, but as citizens. Not as slaves to government, but as citizens, as taxpayers. There's a relation, there's an understanding that the government works for us and not the other way around. And I think that's very different from, say, Berkeley, where I've lived for the last decade, where people just aren't as clear about America. They're not as clear about the Constitution. They're not as clear about the sort of role we play as a country in providing global stability. Because the world relies on America for peace. Like, for all of our flaws, and we have not, I'll be the first to say, our foreign policy has been disastrous in many ways and completely off rails in many ways. But at the same time, the world relies on America for stability, for peace, for all the peacekeeping missions. American troops that are carrying them out. You know, and so I think what happens here in Shasta County is that people here are patriotic. They understand that America is fundamentally, for all of our flaws, we're loyal to America as a country because it's fundamentally a force for good. So all of these things came together kind of in a perfect storm to make Shasta County very different. But I think the difference really boils down to the fact that it's a patriotic county, but it's also a county where the people started showing up. And I think that's not happening in a lot of other places around America. You might have counties that are red, but they just think, oh, we have Republicans running the county. Well, they're Republicans in name only, essentially. And they're just like Mary Ricker, Joe Clemente, and Leonard Modi, where they're basically all about funneling the money from the federal government and plugging the pension hole. Like, they might be Republicans, but they really are just in name only. And so people here started showing up. They started holding officials accountable, and I think we need a lot more of that. And we have the people power for that, because yes, it's true that people who have 9-to-5 jobs have a hard time having the time to go and get involved in local politics, but there is no reason why retirees aren't showing up in mass, because it's their grandkids. It's their grandkids' futures that are being voted away with every one of these votes to spend more and more money. You know, it's their kids, it's their grandkids' futures that are at stake, and it's like the least you could do if you have time is to go show up and just listen and pay attention and start asking questions of the supervisors. Go up and ask questions like, why are you spending this money? How can we spend this money better? Because one of the questions, I mean, this is controversial, but the reality is, like, we're spending all of this money on homeless services, doing everything other than actually housing the homeless in this county. Like, we're spending all of this money, and I've witnessed this in the Bay Area in particular. They spend over $1 billion on the services industry. And it's amazing because it's doing everything except actually housing people. And it's like, okay, so are you trying to solve the problem of the homelessness where you're actually trying to take people off the streets and give them housing? Or are you trying to create a massive public works program that just creates a jobs program? And so there's questions that have to be asked. People have to go up in front of the board and just ask, hey, is there a better way for us to be spending this money? Should we maybe be offering this as a tax cut? Should we be doing it as grants to local businesses? Should it be, how much money did they spend to build up the local economy over the last 5 years here versus how much did they spend on their employees? These sorts of basic spending questions, because fiscal policy is not that complicated at a certain level. It's just, it's common sense. It's like, what's the best use of money? Everyone does their household budgets. You decide whether you want to spend $10 on healthy food or $10 on your television. We make these sorts of decisions all the time. What's the better choice, and how can we make better choices as a county, as a city, as a community?
How has the citizens showing up every week here in Shasta County and holding these supervisors' feet to the fire, what direct impact specifically has that had already that we could encourage people with? Because I think people want to see, hey, what results I want to see that patriots standing up and pushing back and doing what you're talking about is actually winning.
Right.
Yeah.
And I think the good way, the challenge with answering that question is that it's not in what happened, it's in what didn't happen. Yeah. And so if you look at Sonoma County, if you look at Marin, if you look at Alameda, you look at Oregon, look at counties around the country, there were certain actions that were taken that were not taken here. Because I went up in front of the Board of Supervisors back in August, and I explicitly read the home address of the health officer into the public record, and I bluntly told them that if they do not back off, we will hold protests in front of her house, which is a First Amendment protected activity. Mm-hmm. Lawful, peaceful, completely fair game. Maybe not nice, but all the things they're doing is also not nice. Nice is not the standard I'm playing by here. It's fair, it's peaceful and lawful. And what I did was peaceful and lawful. Well, Karen Ramstrom, the health officer, goes up in front of the board, I think a week or a couple weeks later, and goes and says, we don't need 100% mask compliance. We can get away with 60%. And so all of a sudden, the county is not enforcing the masks. We didn't have fines the way the Contra Costa County, Alameda County, and some of these other counties. They started fining people for not wearing masks. They started cracking down on businesses. Here in Shasta County, the Board of Supervisors said, oh, no. Public health is going to be doing education. So the messaging became for public health very early on here. Public health is not an enforcement agency. They're an education agency. I'm sorry. That's a load of nonsense if you look at it historically, because public health is the department that deals with restaurants and shutting down restaurants for, basic health violations. So the idea that they're not an enforcement agency only originated specifically because we held their feet to the fire, and we said, you're going to be held accountable personally.
Yeah.
We're lawfully. I think there is a red line that cannot be crossed, which is the line of threats of violence. Mm-hmm. And I think that's a really clear-cut point where it's like, no, this is where we start going into anarchy, and that's not okay. But I think if it's something is peaceful and it's lawful, it absolutely is fair game. And we've used the full range of peaceful and lawful methods here in Shasta County. And the results have been that the Shasta County is wide open. We've been wide open. I've been going to CrossFit and yoga since June of last year when I moved here, nonstop the entire time, 0 masks in any of the classes. No masks. No one is wearing masks. No one is playing this game. No one is shutting down these businesses. Meanwhile, in Sonoma and Willits, I just heard about a gym being shut down 2 months ago for the same issues because of the health code, all the COVID health orders. So it's undeniable. Shasta County is wide open for business at this point. We've been open in full violation of the purple tier, all the color rainbow nonsense. The restaurants I've been doing dine-in pretty much the entire time at different restaurants here. That's all a product of putting pressure on our public officials, where we didn't get what we want, which is what we wanted the public officials to do their job and to stand as a buffer from the state tyranny that we're facing. They didn't quite do that, but they did the next best thing, which was to basically say, well, we're not going to do enforcement because we know if we do any enforcement, there's going to be war in our streets. And so they got clear on that, and they got clear that the public did not support them. And so, standing up and doing what we've done here has been wildly successful, I think.
It sounds like the citizens of Shasta County understand the Constitution and the framers' intention of our constitutional rights, particularly the First Amendment, and have implemented them and exercised those rights more in alignment with the founders and what they intended, and pretty much use them as a weapon against government overreach, against tyranny. Would you say that's accurate? Yeah.
So I think that is accurate. I think, but I think we have the detail of the Constitution, and then we have the, because you have the detail, and then you have the zoomed out view of the Constitution. And the zoomed out view is that in America, our public officials work for us. We hire them. We dictate what they get to do and what they don't get to do, because the Constitution is only the beginning of the dialogue on individual liberty. It's very much only the beginning. Liberty is not an end state. It's a constant dialogue, and so we're in that dialogue. And I think what happened in Shasta County is the people here understand that the employees work for us, and we don't work for them. And that is quite a different understanding than the sort of understanding I saw in Berkeley for a decade, where it's just like, well, yeah, the government is like, no, the government works for you. Let's get this clear. Government works to make your life better by defending your civil liberties. That is the basic role of government. Public safety is a basic role, because without public safety, you don't have liberties. So these basics have to be met. And I think here in Shasta County, people do understand, they may not go into the Constitution, be a constitutional lawyer, and you don't need to be a constitutional lawyer. You don't need to go know all these details. You need to have the basic framework. Government works for us. The government does not get to infringe on our basic liberties, and it certainly does not get to shut down our businesses. It doesn't get to shut down churches. And yeah, it does boil down to the Constitution, and those basic big principles are all being grossly violated. And the people of Shasta County said, no, you're not going to do that. So here we are. We're in a very different place here in April 2021 than pretty much most counties around us.
So what would you say to the citizens of Shasta County, other than praise and encouragement for doing a great job, but also how could we step up our game?
I think it's all the things that I said before, which is that I think it's really essential to start doing basic citizen engagement. In the most basic, like the recall is great, and I think the recall is I support the recall 100%. I think it's critical that we need, because the people who have stolen our liberties and sold us out for state cash, the Republicans in name only, Mary Rickard, Leonard Modi, and Joe Clemente, who literally sold our liberties for cash, have to be removed. There has to be a penalty, because our politicians need to know when they violate our rights and sell us out, there's a penalty for removal. But it's not going to solve the bigger challenge we're facing. And the bigger challenge only gets solved when people start showing up. It's the people in the community who have the time, it's just a question, they don't have to have the money, they don't have to be particularly smart. They just have to go and start showing up and learning and watching the way their government works and just simply asking questions. Like that, you don't need to know what to say. You just gotta look at okay, you have an agenda today, they're talking about this thing. You have the opportunity to go up in front of the microphone and just ask, hey, Joe, can you tell me more about why this money is being spent in this way?
Do they answer back?
They sometimes do. At the very least, it's on video. And most importantly, now there's a conversation that's going on within the community, because that person who asked the question goes back to their community and says, oh, honey, I went to the board earlier today and they just spent $25 million of our money. And the wife will probably go something like, holy, what do you mean $25 million? And then she's going to talk to her friends, and that's how citizen activism works, and that's what we need. We need to restore that tradition of basic democratic representative governance, which requires the people. We've lost the civic engagement. We need to bring it back. And so, it's time to start showing up at the board meetings. It's time to start having these conversations. Yeah,
so we do have a lot of good things happening, but we also have a lot of people that are obeying whatever they're told, and seem to kind of still be walking around not really realizing that they're free people to take off the mask, breathe in the fresh air of liberty, open up your businesses. A lot are doing it, and that's created a great pushback and a lot of success. but there's a lot that still aren't doing it. And it seems like there's the message isn't really getting into the hearts and minds of people. Is that true? Would you say that's accurate? Can we do a better job of
I think
that?
I think what we're really talking about here is liberty.
Mm-hmm.
And I think it was Donald Rumsfeld once that at one point quipped that free people are free to make bad decisions, something along those lines.
Mm-hmm.
And I disagree with, like, I'm not going. I have not worn the mask. I'm certainly not going to be getting the vaccine. But there's a reality that if I want the freedom of not wearing the mask, if I want the freedom of not getting the vaccine, I have to respect other people's freedom.
Mm-hmm.
We have to, I think that's a really important starting point for this conversation, because it's like what we're really talking about here is liberty. And liberty means diversity. It means people making choices with which we disagree fiercely. Mm-hmm. And choice, following the vaccine debate right now, where between 2007 and end of 2020, there were, in the vaccine reporting system that the CDC maintains, there are about 3,000 people who have been reported as having died after taking the vaccine. So that was between 2007 and end of 2020. Between December of 2020 and April of 2020, over 3,000 people have died in just 4 months from this vaccine after taking the vaccine. I shouldn't say from the vaccine, after taking the vaccine. So we have a period of like 13 years or something, about 3,000 people dying, and now we have 4 months where about 3,000 people have died after taking the vaccine.
The same, so it's pretty much the same number
That is
of
correct.
13 years and 4 months,
4 months
with this vaccine.
That is correct.
Oh my goodness!
So
that's just the CDC.
That
records.
data is
Wow.
That data is from the CDC, and so I'm looking at this, and I'm looking at people, like women I have dated, women I love, taking the vaccine. An ex of mine who is a mother was 2 kids, and another one pregnant with a third one right now with her new husband, and she just took the vaccine. And I'm watching this, and I fiercely disagree, and I fear for her health. I think that this vaccine is bad news. And at the same time, there's a piece about liberty that comes back. It's like, she has the right to make that decision. People have the right to make choices with which we disagree.
Yeah.
And I think the way to really answer your question in particular is that there's a part about, first we have to acknowledge the liberty and the fact that people have the right to make these choices. Mm-hmm. But then we have to get into the question of why are they making the choices they are. And the vaccine side, I'm going to set the vaccine question aside, but I am going to talk about the issue of the mask wearing and some of these other things. If you're wearing a mask because you legitimately think it's the right thing to do, I don't have a problem with that. Like, I don't have a problem. I think if someone legitimately thinks that it's just the right thing to do, whatever, that's freedom, that's liberty. If you take the vaccine, that's liberty. Where things get really tricky is the point where someone wears a mask or someone refuses to open their business for full normalcy because they're afraid. They're afraid of social condemnation from their circle of friends, or they're afraid of enforcement from a government agency that's doing no enforcement. I mean, that's the point where we start talking about this other thing, where there's a basic duty of citizenship to uphold the Constitution and to say no. Like, I think there's a moral responsibility to say, as a citizen of this country, I value my rights, and therefore I'm going to use my rights. And you cannot have my rights because I'm still using them. Mm-hmm. And I think there's a certain kind of failure of citizenship. There's a certain kind of failure to lead on behalf of a number of people, a very large segment of our population that's working not out of a place of courage and leadership, but out of a place of cowardice and fear. And that is shameful. Mm-hmm. And I think that there is a place for a dialogue to start taking place in Shasta County where it's like, no, I'm sorry. Like, unless you genuinely believe this is the right thing to do, because there's a huge, because you have this spectrum of people. You have the people who are anti-mask, you have the people who are pro-mask. And then you have everyone else in between who are just kind of going along. And it's the people who are just going along who I have a real serious issue, because this is no longer just about liberty. It's about acting out of a place of cowardice, fear, and complacency that is flushing the American way of liberty down the toilet.
What do you think is more the reason behind it? Do you think it's more the lack of understanding of our identity as a free people and how powerful our our constitutional law is, or is it they know their liberties, they're very clear, and they have decided to capitulate out of fear or comfort? What do you think?
I think it's a combination of things. I think a lot of it, everything about the messaging of this whole thing has been about social compliance and not being the nail that sticks out. So I think it's a combination of cowardice, fear, and just people going along and being really complacent. And it's like, the government has made it the easiest thing to do is to comply and not stick out. And so a lot of people are just going along with this.
So we need courage.
We need courage. Yeah, we absolutely, because fear is contagious, but so is courage.
So is courage.
So is courage. And I think that's really the deal. It's like the government is trying to push the message of fear, 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 and spread the disease of fear. And there is a simple answer, and that is courage. That's a simple answer to that.
So even one person can make a big difference. One courageous act from a business owner, somebody decide, no, I'm not going to wear the mask. I don't care, because I'm free and I can breathe oxygen. That can be very infectious from what...
Well, but that's how the local businesses. I mean, like we had two businesses, Dill's Deli and San Francisco Deli, that were they openly defied the orders the entire time. It was just two. Then it became everyone.
Yeah.
In the matter of just, and all that took. I mean, I was part of some of those conversations, going into business, just having the conversation and saying, hey, this place is open. And all of a sudden, the Shasta County was in full defiance of the health orders. Mm-hmm. All that took is two people standing up, having backbone. And that was an act of real courage on their part, because they were at real risk. They had no idea what was coming their way. Now we know that there was nothing, but they did know that they thought they were going to lose their license. They thought that all of these, they were going to get dragged off to jail. I mean, like, this was real. Back in like May of last year, this was all real. So they had the backbone, they had the courage to stand up and be like, no, this is what's right. You know, my head is off to Brenda Lunty and Jessica Dill and Mike Dill for what they did in really trailblazing that path. And then other businesses said, well, gee, all these businesses that these two had nothing happened to them, why am I staying shut down? That's how courage spreads. That's what happens, you know, and it's people just stand up and say, no, this doesn't make any sense. I'm not going to comply. You know, so. Yeah, well, thank you for this time. Thank you for this interview. It's been quite a pleasure.
Yeah.
Thank you for this conversation.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, absolutely.
It's been very helpful. Thank you.